yes, he really believes this, that he thinks that he reads the briefs, he knows the issue, and the law is clear. And this to me is, I would speculate, is the effect of religious faith. That you believe somehow that there are answers that you don't need to reason about. And I find it quite startling in someone as smart and as interesting as Scalia. And I remain quite taken aback by it, but I think it was a sincere statement, and I think he believes it. Then he did actually finally say, well, you know, there was one case, and then it was some completely obscure technical tax case, you know, where he said he actually had to think about it. I do think that his years on the court have made him much more determined that everything is there, and you just have to see it, and the answers are there.
One last person, a client, President Clinton.
Well, my contact with Clinton when he was a client, I was one of the lawyers who represented him in the Supreme Court in the Paul Jones case, was very limited. I've had other contact with him, a little bit more extensive. He's a very impressive person. I mean, extraordinarily bright, extraordinarily curious, remarkable amount of information and curiosity and capacity to absorb information. He could have been anything he wanted to be. I mean, I don't have any doubt that this is a person of rare, truly rare talent, and who, in many ways, I think conventional wisdom would be that he squandered it as president, that he could have been a much more successful and effective president had he not been so self-destructive. I think a person of genuine good will, who wanted to make a difference and let himself get in the way. We were, as you know, completely unsuccessful, by the way, in representing him in the Paul Jones case. We lost 9-0.
And look what happened.
And look what happened, right. And so we feel completely vindicated. That's precisely my next comment, right, which is that it was typical of a lawyer's experience. When I got called by someone in the White House who asked if I would represent the president in the Supreme Court in the case, I was provost of the university at the time, and I said, why me? I mean, I don't know anything about this particular area of the law. And they said, well, they wanted someone who was not really identified with any of the sort of political parties. And because I'd been a dean and a provost for a long time, I had to stay out of all this stuff. And so I had been fairly much separated from public life on these issues, but who would be respected as being an independent voice and be trusted by the justices. So I was very flattered by that, of course. And I said, but you know, my understanding of the argument from what I've read in the papers is that you can't sue a sitting president. And I said, that seems crazy. And the person in the White House said, well, yeah, but you know, we've got to play the hand we're dealt. And as happens to lawyers all the time, by the time we finished writing the brief, I was completely sure this was a dead-on right argument and no sensible person could think otherwise. Yet I wasn't surprised by the 9-0 decision. Although if you'd asked me, I couldn't have told you which way it would be 9-0. But the vindication, if it counts for anything, is that one of the lines in Justice Stevens' opinion basically said that, you know, it is inconceivable that a simple lawsuit of the sort involved in this case could possibly distract the president from his official responsibilities. And of course, it wound up with the impeachment of the president. And I imagine that Justice Stevens would like to recall those words if he could. It was a devastatingly wrong decision, at least in terms of policy expectations from the standpoint of the Supreme Court. But it was great fun. It was a great experience to represent the president in the Supreme Court. That's the sort of historic moment, and it was a real privilege to do that.
I'll go against my word that was the last person. Since you just mentioned Justice Stevens, Illinois, Chicago guy by origin. Do you know him? Do you have a...
Yeah, I know Stevens a bit. Stevens is a graduate of the University of Chicago, not the law school, but the college. And I have had a number of opportunities to spend time with him. He's a lovely, sweet man, very friendly, very warm, very thoughtful, very smart. he was a bit of a wild card, I think, when he first came on the court. Edward Levy, to bring things full circle, was the one who selected Stevens when Edward was Attorney General. And he and Stevens had known each other from their Chicago connections. And Stevens was, what Levy wanted in that justice, in that appointment, was someone who would be at the center of the court and bring the court together, as just as the nation needed to be brought together. And Stevens turned out not to be that. Stevens tended to be highly idiosyncratic as a justice, and he would frequently write opinions that no one else joined, and that were interesting, but didn't really make a whole lot of sense necessarily in terms of where the law was at that moment in time. But over the years, I think he's become a very effective justice, not so much as being in the center of the court. I think he's always sort of been more peripheral and floated around. But like so many other judges over time, I think he has come to appreciate the responsibilities of a justice in a way that has moved him more to the left. I think he started as a genuine moderate, but I think he's moved more to the left over the years. He's a very smart judge. He's someone who really thinks well about these questions, thinks clearly, understands the stakes, and understands the legal arguments perfectly well. A very admirable judge.
New York Giants. You missed them.
Yeah, I grew up in the Bronx and in Queens and then in Long Island, and my father was a New York Giants baseball fan, so when I was a kid, I grew up rooting for the New York Giants baseball team and was absolutely devastated when they announced they were moving to San Francisco. I don't think I would have been as upset if my parents had announced they were getting divorced. I survived it. I remained an avid fan of the New York Giants baseball team for probably 20 or so years after they left, but gradually lost interest and have become sort of a Chicago fan, which means I can root for any team in Chicago that's winning. But I have absolutely no interest in rooting for them when they're losing. It's really shallow, but it maximizes the advantages of being a sports fan.
And you were there when Vic Wertz hits the long fly.
I was there in 1954 World Series game when Vic Wertz hit the ball to deep center field in the Polo Grounds, and Willie Mays made that incredible over-the-shoulder catch. And the same game when Dusty Rhodes hit one of his 2 home runs to win the game at the last at-bat for the Giants. Those were great days. Those were great days.
Not very good days for around here because most of them were for the Cleveland Indians around here.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm sorry for that.
This has been terrific, Jeff. Thanks so much for being part of the Jackson Center.
My pleasure. It's a great organization, great center, and any way I can help with the future, you should always feel free to call on me.
We will. We accept.
Great.
On tape.
Great.
That was